Corinthians, Galatians and Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now it's 1st Timothy, then it's 2nd Timothy, Titus and Philemon, and Hebrews, James. And now it's 1st Peter, and then it's 2nd Peter, 1st John, 2nd John, 3rd John, Jude, Revelation. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books of the Bible. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books. It's a letter from God that sets everyone free, a gift for you, for me. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books of the Bible. Whoa, 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 whoa. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, and Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians and Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now it's 1st Timothy, then it's 2nd Timothy, Titus and Philemon, Hebrews, James. Now it's 1st Peter, and then it's 2nd Peter, 1st John, 2nd John, 3rd John, Jude. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books of the Bible. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books. It's a letter from God that sets everyone free, a gift for you, for me. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books of the Bible. Now you know the books of the Bible, the wonderful books of the Bible. Yeah, you know the books of the Bible, the wonderful books. It's a letter from God that sets everyone free, a gift for you, for me. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books of the Bible. It's a letter from God that sets everyone free, a gift for you, for me. These are the books of the Bible, the wonderful books of the Bible.
The story of the Bible goes something like this. 6,000 years ago, God makes a whole lot of stuff suddenly pop into existence, including the first humans, Adam and Eve. But after a dispute involving fruit, God punishes Adam and Eve along with every human who will ever live by denying them eternal life and banishing them from paradise. A few generations later, God decides he isn't quite done with punishing humans and drowns almost all of them in a global flood, mercifully granting the survival of just enough animals and humans to repopulate the planet, who survive the catastrophe in a wooden box. The story continues with a rather dull part about a series of camel-riding patriarchs, one of whom almost murders his son after hearing voices in his head. It turns out these patriarchs are the ancestors of a favoured people called Israel, whom God will eventually choose to be the only nation on earth worth bothering about. When this nation becomes enslaved in Egypt, God arranges to bust them out of captivity using a series of disasters, which culminate in every Egyptian firstborn being slaughtered. It's important to stress at this point that God is the good guy in all of this. It would normally take you just a couple of weeks to walk from Egypt to Canaan, but God decides to make Israel do this in 4 decades just to show them who's boss, during which time the overwhelming majority of those who escaped Egypt die in the desert as a result of more of God's punishments. On arrival in Canaan, the surviving Israelites mount a genocidal campaign of conquest to ethnically cleanse the region of all non-Israelites. The region is then ruled by a series of judges, some of whom, like Samson, have superhuman powers, until eventually God, who up to this point has been allowed to have the final say on pretty much everything, reluctantly allows the Israelites to appoint a king. The first king, Saul, eventually dies in battle and is succeeded by Israel's most famous king, David, whose exploits include having sex with the wife of one of his soldiers and then arranging for her husband to die in battle. As punishment, God arranges for the baby that resulted from the affair to die, because he's reasonable like that. Anyway, you then have a line of good kings and bad kings, culminating in God allowing the Babylonians to punish his people by destroying Jerusalem in 587 BCE. 50 years later, God punishes the Babylonians for punishing the Israelites by having their capital overrun by the Medo-Persians. As a result, the Israelites are allowed to return from exile in Babylon and finally rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. We now fast forward in the story about 400 years from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Enter a virgin named Mary, whom God impregnates so that she can give birth to a child named Jesus. Jesus, it turns out, is God's master plan for redeeming mankind from the centuries of misery and death that resulted from the fruit incident. Jesus quickly establishes himself as something of a celebrity guru, reinforcing his credentials by performing miracles, because back in those days, people were only expected to believe if they were given evidence. When the Jewish leaders grow jealous of his rising popularity, they conspire for Jesus to be tortured and executed by the Romans. But in a major twist, it turns out Jesus dying was the plan all along, because God can't forgive people unless there's some form of human sacrifice, and by arranging for the death of his son, he gets to forgive the sins of everyone who will ever live. But unlike most deaths, the death of Jesus lasts just 3 days before he is resurrected and makes a brief comeback tour before levitating into the clouds. The final books of the Bible tell the story of how Christianity is formed once Jesus has left the scene. A whole bunch of letters are written establishing the rules for the new religion of Christianity, which is supposed to replace Judaism, but unfortunately carries across much of the unpleasant stuff from the Old Testament, such as the subjugation of women, the endorsement of slavery, and the hatred of gay people. And that's pretty much the story of the Bible in 5 minutes. If you've enjoyed this, please don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and thank you for watching.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers,